Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I'll be your host. This is your voice for liberty and gun rights, because silence isn't an option. Subscribe and stay armed with truth. You can contact me at lgrinfo@proton.me. That's lgrinfo@proton.me. Thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I'll be your host. Liberty and Gun Rights, the podcast where we stand firm for freedom, responsibility, and the constitutional rights that define America. Today I'm joined by Rick Lynch, a dedicated advocate for liberty, a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and a voice for responsible gun ownership. Together, we'll talk about what freedom really means, the challenges we face in defending it, and how we can stay united in protecting our rights for generations to come. Rick Lynch, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Rick Lynch, author, retired federal employee, and please don't hold that against me. A former Marine. That's where I got my start with the federal government, and then a whole bunch of civilian postings thereafter. And I've just written a book on money and liberty. Money and Liberty is the title, How the Framers' Obsession with Protecting Your Money Shaped the Constitution.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll talk about the heart of liberty first. And for the listening audience, this is our second or third take trying to get this right. So we've already kind of talked about framers versus
founders.
What did you say? Huh?
The founding fathers versus the framers.
Right. Founding fathers versus the framer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. It's a minor quibble of mine. It kind of drives me nuts, but I do think it's important. And you can go out today and you can buy, probably 1,000 books written about the U.S. Constitution. And every single one of those authors, I promise you, will get it wrong. They will conflate the founding fathers with the framers. Those are two entirely separate groups of men. They cannot be used interchangeably. To do so is to muddy the waters and make a mistake. The founding fathers, if you Google this, you will see it's 6 men, 7, 8. Lists differ, lists vary. These men contributed to the founding of our nation before, during, and after the Revolution, like George Washington, James Madison. Again, that list is elastic. It's flexible. It depends on who you speak to. The framers, however, there's nothing elastic about that. You either were in Philadelphia in 1787 writing the Constitution, or you were not. And if you were, you are one of the framers, one of the 55 men who is a framer of the Constitution. Some men do appear on both lists. Madison and Washington are framers and founders. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are only founding fathers. They were not at the convention. They are not framers.
That's very interesting. I don't think I knew that.
No, it amazes me. You can be Justice Robert Bork and you can write the best-selling book ever on the U.S. Constitution and get that wrong, and you can be everybody in the world and get it wrong. And I always wonder. I say it's minor, but I wonder. You've just written 400 pages on the subject, and I can pick on a lot of authors, and you got that completely wrong. It just makes me wonder what else you have missed. But anyway.
How can you get to research that wrong, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
So speaking on the heart of liberty, what does liberty mean to you on a personal, spiritual, and moral level?
Well, my horizons have been broadened. It used to mean to me, I think what it means to most people, the freedom to choose your path in life, to speak your thoughts, to have your thoughts, to be your own person, to not be subject to the domain of man in your moral conscience while here on earth. I think that's what it used to mean to me. But after beginning this book 30 years ago, it acquired a different level. And I came to realize that the fruits of my body, soul, mind, and labor, the things that I create or earn through body, soul, mind, and labor, my property, my money, is also a sacred right. And for the framers, it was by far the most important sacred right. And I just want to be clear about that. We're speaking very philosophically, but the framers believed that the dirty, sweat-stained, grubby dollar bills in your pocket are yours by sacred right. Your right to your money is the most important of the natural rights. And I'm sure I'll get into it, and I'll back that up 1,000 ways from Sunday with all the quotations and all the religious speech that they adorn property rights with.
Gotcha. So freedom is both a right and a responsibility before God and country. Also, do you have your book still?
Oh, yeah. Here.
Yeah.
1.5 second.
There you go.
One half second.
Put that in front of the camera and move it over to your right just a little bit.
That
Money
looks
and Liberty,
good.
How the Framers' Obsession with Protecting Your Money Shaped the Constitution by Rick Lynch. Very good.
Available everywhere. Ebook,
Available
Kindle,
everywhere.
Barnes and Noble, everywhere you can buy a book, you can find it.
You can buy it in paperback, and you get it in Kindle version, digital version.
Hardback,
That's
Kindle,
great.
paperback, paperback, Kindle, yeah, any version.
So talking about freedom as both a right and a responsibility before God and country.
Well, yeah, that's very true. I think some people will argue that responsibility part, exactly. I mean, responsible to whom while here on earth? I mean, to whom are you responsible with your freedom? What do you owe others? Some people, you can get very, very deep in the weeds on a philosophical question with that, as opposed to what you owe those on earth versus what you owe your creator. But I do believe, I think most people believe freedom does come with responsibility. I am free to do many, many terrible things which do not actually harm others, but they're still terrible, and I shouldn't do them. And, we can all come up with a list of things that we are legally entitled to do, reprehensible, terrible things we can say to people or about people. You're free to do those, but you shouldn't do those. You just shouldn't.
Right. So how do moral strength and personal integrity uphold a free society?
Without moral strength and personal integrity, society falls apart. I mean, it's really quite clear what happens. I don't know how political we want to get, but we see lots and lots and lots of people threatening to riot and to steal and to commit crimes if they don't get their EBT benefits come the next day or whenever the shutdown is.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I forget. I should know this. I'm sure your audience knows this very well. Who was the framer or the founder who said that the Constitution and this country are for religious and moral people only, and it will do for no others? I'm sure I should know that. But yes, lacking moral responsibility, freedom leads to very bad things.
it leads to chaos and anarchy, right?
First chaos and anarchy, and then iron-fisted tyranny, as John Adams said of the French Revolution. Anarchy and tyranny come first, and then the rise of a strong man to end the anarchy and tyranny.
So that leads me to think about the No King's Day. The No King's Day, not celebrations, but demonstration. Yeah, No King's demonstration. Apparently there were 7 million people all across America that were participating in the No King's Day. And I'm kind of confused. We don't have a king. We don't have kings in America, in the United States of America. We
do not. And if we did, those 7 million people, and I've seen estimates as low as 1.5 million, those 7 million people would probably not have been allowed to carry on the way they did. But no, we do not.
No, absolutely not.
We do not have kings in America. No, this is true.
I think that those millions of people, however many of those there were, I think those people were kind of whipped into a lather by some rhetoric and just false statements and things that are not true, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I cannot think of any human being on planet Earth who has been as vilified as the president. And the man has his flaws. I believe that anybody seeking a high public office probably has some inherent flaws. But he's been called Hitler 135, noon. Okay.
Right.
that does tend to excite people. It really does tend to excite people. It's outrageous. The rhetoric has to be toned down. I don't know if it ever will be. But yeah, you said it yourself. Some of this rhetoric has stirred up people, and some people believe anything. And you can have. There's never been an elected official in this country I couldn't take to task for hours on end. Okay, but come on, Hitler. And Hitler and Hitler and Hitler 750,000 times a day for 10 years is a bit much.
That's a little bit much. It's kind of extreme. Extremism.
Yeah, indeed.
So, Rick, when you think about liberty, what's at its core for you? Faith, family, or something deeper?
Well, political liberty, and that's what my book is about. Faith and family come first. They're in a separate sphere. Government cannot. I divide my life in half. Government cannot deliver satisfaction, happiness in faith and family. That's not their job. They can't do it, and
Right.
they even have a hard time oppressing it. You can pass any law you want, and what goes on in my mind with my faith and family is unaffected by the little laws you pass. Politically speaking, liberty, as I hinted at earlier and what the book is about, it used to mean certain things, but now I see that the most important political liberty there is, by far, I see as being in property, in your money. Your property and your money are the true keystones of civil liberty, and that's what the framers believed, and they believed in passionately. And I have so many quotations from the framers and the founders and people who've written about them to back that up. Just one little statistic that I dug up on my own. In the Federalist Papers, the 85 essays that the framers of the Constitution wrote to explain the Constitution that they had just written, to explain it and justify it, they talk about money and property 17 times as often, the single right, property, 17 times as often as they mention the big three rights of the First Amendment combined. In a political sense, liberty to me means keeping the fruits of my labor.
Okay. So I have lots of questions I could ask, but as I told you, when I invited you to the podcast, I really loved the fact that you've researched the Constitution and that you've researched a lot of things. And I invited you onto the podcast so that we can delve into those things a little, not superficially, but maybe get down into the nuts and bolts, get into the weeds of some of your research. So I'm going to ask you to, tell me your talking points. Talk about your book and what you wrote about.
I think that I found three things. I have found three things about the U.S. Constitution that virtually nobody knows, almost nobody. And I think that, and they're huge, gigantic things, not that little quibble about a framer versus a founder. And if you don't know these things, then you cannot ever understand the U.S. Constitution. And when I say nobody, I mean, I always come back to my prime example is Justice Robert Bork wrote probably the best-selling book about the U.S. Constitution ever written, The Tempting of America, and he gets it wrong. I mean, virtually everybody gets it wrong. And the first of the three things is the Bill of Rights. I believe you earlier had said, before the technical difficulties, you talked about the First Amendment protecting our speech rights. Well, the framers of the U.S. Constitution wrote the Constitution and completed the Constitution, and they believed passionately that they had indeed protected your speech rights and your gun rights and your religious rights. They believed passionately they had protected those. They knew they had protected those, and yet there was no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Myth number one, the framers of the Constitution of the United States had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Bill of Rights. I'm sorry, that's the truth. The myth is they wrote it. They had nothing to do with it. The founding fathers of the United States of America had absolutely nothing to do with the Bill of Rights. When the Bill of Rights was proposed at the Constitutional Convention, the framers, the men who actually wrote the Constitution, said it was preposterous, unnecessary, and dangerous. The state delegations at the convention, voting as blocks, rejected the idea unanimously. Of the 55 men at the convention, only 3 spoke in favor of the measure. Now, why? Now, you will never, ever, ever understand the Constitution if you do not know why the framers said the Bill of Rights is unnecessary, preposterous, and dangerous. So let me tell you why they said those things, why they refused to put a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. The Bill of Rights came, by the way, 3.5 years later in a different state, in a different city, in a political forum, and again, had nothing to do with the founding fathers or the framers. Why did the framers reject the Bill of Rights? And it certainly was not because they did not believe in the rights that you find in the Bill of Rights passionately. The framers believed in those rights passionately with all their soul. Why then is the Bill of Rights a bad idea? Let us start with unnecessary and preposterous first. The strategy behind protecting your rights inherent in the Bill of Rights is to write them down. You're going to write a tiny little list of your rights. The framers said, and they repeated over and over and over, there's a problem with this. You have lots and lots and lots of rights. You write a list of your rights, you're going to fail. You're going to forget, you're going to leave stuff off. You have a lot more rights than any little list that we're going to write is going to contain. You have way more rights. That's one of the problems with the Bill of Rights. The framers had a much, much, much better idea. A much better idea. Instead of writing a tiny little list of your rights, known as the Bill of Rights, they would write a similar list, a tiny little list of the powers of the federal government. Article 1, Section 8. Here are the powers of the federal government. Very boring and mundane things. Secure the border, raise an army, have a post office, collect tariffs, have a judicial system, blah, 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 blah. These are the few and boring powers of the federal government. Anything not on our tiny little list of federal government powers belongs to the people. In other words, if you look at that list, post office, army, navy, tariffs, you see nothing about telling you who to worship, taking your guns, suppressing free speech, oppressing the press. You see nothing there. Therefore, the federal government has no power, no authority to do any of those things. I think it becomes blindingly obvious why the Bill of Rights is unnecessary in a tenth of a second. Every single right contained in the Bill of Rights, every single right was already off limits to the federal government. That is why the framers said that the Bill of Rights is unnecessary and preposterous. Now, why is it dangerous? Well, that's a much, much, much better question. Why is it dangerous to write down you have the right to own guns, even though the enumeration already made that clear by not giving the power of the feds to take it away? Why is that dangerous? And here, when I first stumbled upon this fact, I fell out of my chair and I passed out and I didn't wake up for a month because it was so staggering and overwhelming. If you write down a list of a few of your rights, you create the impression, you can finish the sentence for me, you create the impression that those are all of your rights. And believe me, that is the world in which we live today. Every single living, breathing person on this planet believes that the federal government can, let's just say, establish a Department of Education that's legal and constitutional. And why is that legal and constitutional? If you look at the Bill of Rights, you don't see anything about it says the government won't take your guns. Does it say the government will not establish a Department of Education? No, it does not. Leaving people the impression that that is legal and constitutional. It's like if I punish my daughter. My daughter has 100 toys in her room. If I punish my daughter and I send her upstairs and say, don't you dare play with your American Girl doll, did I give her permission to play with her other toys? No, I did not. Did I leave the impression that she could play with her other toys? Yes, I did. That is the world we live in today. Before the Bill of Rights, which came 3.5 years after the Constitution, you had every single right contained in the Bill of Rights, plus 100 billion others. The government had 10 powers, 15, 16, whatever. After the Bill of Rights, you get those rights listed in the Bill of Rights and no others. And the government, I think I listed in the book 29 powers. Instead of having 29 powers, the government now has 29 billion powers. The government has the power and authority and legal right, because of the way the Bill of Rights is misunderstood, to take your money, your paycheck, and send it to Sri Lanka to teach journalists how not to use offensive language. If you look at the Bill of Rights, it doesn't say anything about, no, government, you shall not do this, creating the impression that they are allowed to do this. Let me give you one quotation from Franklin Pierce, I believe it was, 14th President of the United States, looking at a welfare expenditure for drought-stricken farmers that the federal government was going to bail out. Because he believed in the enumeration, Article 1, Section 8, the limited powers of the federal government, he wrote, cannot undertake to place my finger on that part of the Constitution which allows me to expend for benevolence the property of my constituents, words to that effect. I cannot find that part of the Constitution that allows me to engage in welfare spending. If he had gone to the Bill of Rights, he'd have said, I cannot find that part of the Bill of Rights that prohibits me from spending this money. And he would have taken your money and given it to somebody else. So that's number one. I say there are 3 things in my book that people get wrong about the Constitution. That's number one. The Bill of Rights, as you can see, is 180 degrees opposed to, diametrically opposite the strategy inherent in the enumeration. The enumeration is a tiny little list of government powers. Everything else belongs to you. The Bill of Very Few Rights is a tiny little list of your rights. Everything else belongs to the government. We live today under a federal government that's virtually all powerful. And why is that? The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights destroyed the Constitution. It eviscerated it. It turned it on its head, and it threw it in the trash. And the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution predicted that's exactly what would happen. I have many quotations to back that up. So that's number one.
That's interesting.
To me, it is one of the most extraordinary things I'd ever discovered in my entire life. The day I stumbled upon it was earth-shattering to me. One of the men at the convention, one of my favorites, talking about rejecting the Bill of Rights, James Wilson, Pennsylvania delegate, he said, enumerate all the rights of men. I am sure, sir, that no gentleman at the convention would have attempted such a thing. That's the flaw of the Bill of Rights. It's trying to list your rights, and it falls short. It's a tiny little list, and I'd rather have a big fat list when you're talking about my rights.
So and I'm going to show some of my ignorance here probably, but weren't some of the Bill of Rights, wasn't that directly tied to some of the atrocities by the king in England?
No, that's another huge, gigantic misconception about the U.S. Constitution, and which leaps ahead, skipping some of my other points. The idea is that the Constitution was written because of the recently defeated monarchy and everything we had learned about kings and this and that and that. Utterly, absolutely, completely
I guess
false.
I'm thinking about the amendments to the Constitution and not necessarily the Bill of Rights, right?
Well, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments. Remember, the Constitution is written in Philly in 1787. It's done, it's signed, it's ratified, and it goes into law. The Bill of Rights came 3.5 years later. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments.
Okay.
And that's one of the gigantic myths of the Bill of Rights, that it had anything whatsoever to do with, well, we don't want to be like the monarchy. And see, the United States government had existed for the entirety of the Revolution. 1776, the Revolution kicked off in 1775. I do believe the Articles of Confederation came in 1776, and the Articles of Confederation were in effect clean until after the convention, 1787. The reason the Constitution was written, and we'll get to that with point 3, had absolutely nothing to do with the recently defeated monarchy. The British had been gone. Yorktown was 1781. By the time the convention rolls around, the British had been gone for 6 years already, and we're already living under the Articles of Confederation. The U.S. Constitution was written to correct the defects of the existing U.S. government. No one said, well, the king used to do this, we'll make sure the king doesn't do that, because none of the state governments were doing any king-like things. The Articles of Confederation were doing no king-like things. The U.S. Constitution was written because, as one delegate said, the evils we experience, in other words, the evils we experience that lead us to the convention, that make the convention necessary, flow from the excess of democracy in the various states. I don't know if most people know that the framers were horrified and terrified by democracy, which is why we do not live in a democracy. We live in a republic. So the Constitution was written, had nothing whatever to do with the king or the English, or, it was written to correct the evils that we experience that flow from an excess of democracy in the various states. And that's leaping ahead to point 3. As I say in my book, I think I find 3 things that nobody knows. They rejected the Bill of Rights, why they rejected the Bill of Rights, and then the whole excess of democracy is my third point, the thing that democracies were doing in this country that led to the convention.
So what was your second point?
The second point, and I touched on earlier, most people, I've touched on this earlier, we have spent our entire lives talking about the government sending your paycheck. You woke up this morning, James, and you went to work to send money to journalists in Sri Lanka. Now, we have spent, well,
I did
I
not.
know my wife did. If you somehow got out of that, kudos to you. But I think actually that you did. I don't think you had any choice in the matter. We have spent our entire lives, looking at that kind of expense and saying ridiculous, wasteful, outlandish, insane, breathtakingly stupid, blah-de-blah, blah, 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 blah. The framers would have described that as a violation of your sacred God-given natural rights. Let me give you some quotations from a couple authors and the framers themselves. The framers, one author said, had an almost religious respect for property, i.e. your paycheck. Delete the word almost. The framers believed your right to your paycheck was sacred, given by the Creator, the God Almighty himself, just as your free speech rights and your rights to self-defense came from the Creator. Delete almost religious. Another author said that the framers speak of property almost always in starkly religious tones. Yes, they did. There's John Adams. The moment the idea, and John Adams and Madison all explained that the word property does indeed mean money. John Adams wrote, the moment the idea is introduced into society, that property is not as sacred as the laws of God. Anarchy and tyranny commence. At the convention, one of the delegates talked about America's first welfare program, and he said it was as alarming as the mark of the beast in Revelation. Starkly religious tones. John Adams had another juicy one. He said that the French, during the French Revolution, are falling into chaos and tyranny and direct and pure democracy, and property will not be respected at all. And he said they will find that property is as the lamb committed to the world. The lamb committed to the world comes straight from the Bible. In that quotation, the lamb is Jesus Christ. In John and Adams' formulation, the lamb is money. I don't know how to make it more clear. And as I say, the framers speak of money in the Federalist Papers more than 17 times as often as they speak of the rights in the big three rights of the First Amendment combined. For the framers, liberty and freedom meant economic freedom. The product of your body, soul, mind, and labor created by your hands is yours by sacred right. That's number two. Now, I have to rush in there to say, because people will often say, well, taxation is criminal. No, taxation is 100% absolutely, totally legitimate. It's demanded. It must be. Nothing is more legitimate than taxation because we human beings wish to live in, quote, civil society. We wish to rise above the dreaded state of nature, which Hume or Locke, I get my boys confused, the dreaded state of nature where life is, I'm sure you've heard, nasty, brutish, and short. We want government. We need government. And if you want government and need government to provide its basic services, you must pay for it. Our rights, and I need to be clear about this, our rights to our property are exactly like our free speech rights. When you enter into civil society, those rights are compromised. You must pay taxes, compromised only minimally and when necessary. For example, you have the right to free speech. I gave you these two examples before the technical difficulties, but you do not have the right to say the government is terrible with bull horns and sound trucks in front of the old folks' home at 4 a.m. on a Sunday. I have a right to self-defense. I don't get to take my fully loaded machine gun and lay it on the defendant's table in front of me when they read out the verdict in my murder trial. Your rights in civil society are compromised minimally and when necessary, and the same goes for your speech rights. We seem to live in a day and age where the government can take every single penny you make for any ridiculous, outlandish, nonsensical reason you could possibly dream up and flush it down the toilet. And people, again, will call it ridiculous, but they don't recognize it as a violation of their sacred natural rights. Your money needs to be treated exactly like your speech rights. I have to pay to secure the border. I have to pay customs, is the oldest government branch there is. I have to pay. Those people who work for customs need a paycheck. I have to pay for that. I do not have to send my money to Sri Lanka to teach journalists to be nice people. I do not have to send my money to New York to Senators Schumer and Hillary Clinton for a Woodstock museum in New York State when I live in Virginia. I don't have to do that. That's nonsense.
So I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here for a second. We all were hoodwinked or forced into paying Social Security taxes out of our paychecks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember or know when that first happened. It was a long time ago.
The late 30s.
Yeah, so the federal government said, okay, we're going to set up Social Security, and everybody has to pay X amount of dollars or percentage of their income into the Social Security benefits program, so that when you become senior citizens, it'll be there for you and it will help you put food on your table or whatever.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of paraphrasing here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
now our illustrious leaders. But let me backtrack. One of the senators said not too long ago that we need to quit acting as if Social Security benefits are an entitlement. We feel like we're entitled to those funds. My head probably spun off my shoulders, and I had to go to my wife probably had to take me to the emergency room to have it reattached.
Well, those are our funds, but
yeah, I'm like, what? What do you mean entitlement? So anyway, I had to get that out. And I'm sure that a lot of the people in my listening audience who are Second Amendment supporters and liberty supporters and supporters of the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights and all of that, very patriotic folks, I'm sure they feel the same way, right? Because we didn't have a choice. We weren't given a choice.
Yeah.
There wasn't a survey that said, A, I want to take part in this, or B, no, I'd rather keep my money and you're not going to have it. Well, now there's another, I guess in Congress, they're looking to, just like they renamed the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, now they're going to rename Social Security benefits into a federal, what are they calling it? A federal benefit payment.
Well,
What?
I'm not sure what the question is, but I can tell you that if you go to the enumeration, the original and better Bill of Rights, and you look at the powers of the federal government, you'll see that just like the Department of Education, Social Security is absolutely, completely, totally, 100% unequivocally illegal and unconstitutional, period. I mean, what more can you say? And you said your listeners respect the Bill of Rights. This is one of my missions in life. I want everyone to stop respecting the Bill of Rights and to see it as James Madison sees it, as destroying the U.S. Constitution. Because if you read the Bill of Rights, Social Security system is 100% constitutional, and so is sending your money to Sri Lanka to give to journalists.
I got you.
I know that at first, when people hear that, they'll want to look my address up so they can come find me and do bad things to me. But I'm sorry. Don't listen to me. Listen to James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, who called the Bill of Rights unnecessary and dangerous. Listen to the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution and said it was a very bad idea.
So you're saying that the Bill of Rights is actually limiting our rights?
Who could say otherwise? It's a tiny little list. Of course it limits our rights.
Right.
Who could
That's
say
true.
otherwise? I mean, you can recite the thing in 18 seconds.
Right.
Of course it limits our rights. Again, go back to Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce didn't look at the Bill of Rights. He looked at the enumeration, and your freedom was expanded and government power was limited. When he looked at the enumeration, he limited government power. When you look at the Bill of Rights, all it does is expand government power. There is the perfect example. Here comes the spending bill. The spending bill does not know whether or not the enumeration exists or the Bill of Rights exists. The spending bill has no idea whatsoever. If you read the enumeration, the spending bill that takes your money, your liberty, and your freedom and throws it in the garbage, if you read the enumeration, that spending bill dies. If you go to the Bill of Rights, James, say goodbye to your money because it's going to Sri Lanka. I don't know how to be more clear about it. And again, please don't look at me and say that Rick Lynch is a terrible person. Look at the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution and explain that is what would happen. Oh, and of course, Second Amendment, your guns were already secure under the original U.S. Constitution. Yes, they were. Just like everything else in the Bill of Rights. There's an interesting book. Here, I'll give you another quotation. There's an interesting book. And if you want, we can delve into exactly how is it that the Bill of Rights ever came into existence when the framers felt so badly about it. We can discuss that because it is a very, very, very political tale. It has nothing to do with political philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's bare knuckle politics, but there's a book that explains all this. How did the Bill of Rights come into existence? And in the preface to that book, the man writes that James Madison, and your listeners might be confused by this, James Madison carefully crafted the Bill of Rights, listen carefully, to change not one single word of the U.S. Constitution. Again, as I've said, the federal government could not oppress your speech rights, promote a religion, or take your guns before the Bill of Rights. So what's the Bill of Rights do? It does nothing. And as the man who wrote the book said, James Madison carefully crafted the Bill of Rights to change not one single word of the U.S. Constitution. So again, if you want to get into it is a fascinating tale. How did the Bill of Rights come to exist?
Well, that begs, in my mind, I'm like, well, why was it written to begin with? If it wasn't necessary, then are we talking?
I'm glad you asked. Pure, raw, ugly, nasty, filthy politics. I'm glad you asked. Okay, here comes the U.S. Constitution. There are many, many, many people in the country opposed to this U.S. Constitution. Ratifying it, getting the states to vote yes, was not an easy thing. It was a very tough run fight. It could have gone either way. The anti-federalists did not like the U.S. Constitution. They feared an all-powerful federal Leviathan. Now, I think they were wrong because for the first 150 years, we did not have an all-powerful federal Leviathan. But they're correct now. In Virginia, the anti-federalists rule, especially Patrick Henry. He rules the roost. James Madison writes the Constitution. Patrick Henry and the anti-federalists, they don't like it. So when it comes time to choose a senator for the first U.S. Congress, do Patrick Henry and his boys choose James Madison? No, they do not. Because remember, back in the day, U.S. senators were not chosen by the people in an election. Very wisely so. The state legislators chose your senator. James Madison should have been a senator from Virginia with his stature in the first Congress. He was not, because Patrick Henry and the Anti-Federalist rule. So James Madison says, okay, I'm going to run for the congressional seat, and that is chosen by popular election. He says, listen, you guys want this Bill of Rights? You want a Bill of Rights? I'll give you a Bill of Rights. No problem. I promise you. My first job when I get up there is I'm going to write you a Bill of Rights. He wins that House seat. James Madison now is promised to write a Bill of Rights. So because he's a genius, he says, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a Bill of Rights without really writing a Bill of Rights, and I'm going to change. I wrote the U.S. Constitution, says James Madison, because he did. I wrote the thing. I don't want to change it. I just wrote it 10 minutes ago. I'm not changing this thing. You want a Bill of Rights? I'll give you a Bill of Rights. He fakes a Bill of Rights. As one author noted, the Bill of Rights was a sop to the unenlightened. It's a fake. It's a scam. It's a trick. It changed nothing. Now, that was designed to fool the voters, the people who wanted a Bill of Rights. Sidetrack. There is some debate about whether the people really truly wanted a Bill of Rights at all, or is that just the intellectual leadership, Patrick Henry and his people, who are pushing it? Who knows? I don't know. So he writes the fake Bill of Rights that changes nothing, and he gets his House seat. And how do you know it changed? Here's a wonderful thing. The man who insisted and demanded and stomped his feet and threw a hissy fit demanding a Bill of Rights, Patrick Henry, what does he do after he sees the document that James Madison wrote? Well, he refused to support it completely and absolutely and totally. He refused to support it because he saw the trick that James Madison pulled. So that's how the Bill of Rights came into being. It was designed to trick the people, and it did. And ironically, in the long run, it turned the federal government into the all-powerful Leviathan monster that Patrick Henry feared.
Wow.
Oh, yes, it's an incredible tale.
That is incredible. I'm going to have to figure out how to wrap my brain around all of that.
Yes, thank you very much. Because I'm telling you, I'll tell this tale to 100 people, and 90% of them, well, they don't seem to realize how significant it is. But yeah, the largest myth that ever existed in the entire history of the world is that the founding fathers and or the framers gave us the Bill of Rights because they wanted to protect these really important rights. And it's pure nonsensical garbage. It's absolutely false in every imaginable way.
First, I wonder if you're the first author that has said that.
I do believe I am. I have found, in the years and years and years and years I've been researching this book, I keep fearing that someone is going to beat me to it and publish before me. And I can tell you, I have found a few public intellectuals today that get half of the story right. Here's what they say. They say, well, yes, the framers thought the Bill of Rights was unnecessary because of the enumeration. They get that right. But then they say something. Remember, the framers said unnecessary and dangerous. Then these people say, yes, the Bill of Rights was unnecessary. But at the end of the day, by golly, I'm glad we've got it, because that whole thing about the enumeration, Article 1, Section 8, no one pays attention to that. That's been forgotten. That's been ignored. So at least we've got these 10 or 15 rights, because otherwise we'd have none. And I just want to grab these people by their lapels and shake them with great passion, because, well, why is it, genius, that the enumeration's been forgotten? I think the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution told us why it's forgotten. It's forgotten because of the Bill of Rights. If not for the Bill of Rights, the enumeration... Think about this for a minute. I need to calm down.
No, you're fine.
If the Bill of Rights had never been written, that means that from day one, 250 years later, every single one of those 190,000 quadrillion federal court cases that delve on the powers and authorities of the federal government, every single one of them would have referred back to the enumeration. That is the only place where you talk about the powers, authorities of the federal government. Every single one. The idea that somehow they'd have been they believe me, the enumeration's forgotten now. It's in the toilet, it's in the trash, it's in the garbage. It's pure crap, utterly forgotten. But it would not have been if not for the Bill of Rights. There's no way it could ever have been. There'd be 100 billion federal court cases that discuss the enumeration and say this proposal to give farmers James Moffitt's money because they're having hard times, there'd be 100,000 federal court cases that say no. I'm reading the enumeration, and I don't see anything in there about farmers or seeds or droughts or tough times. I don't see it. Right. So to the very few authors, and I can only think of two, they came close, but no cigar.
Wow.
That's what I say.
I'm kind of speechless. I'm kind of speechless.
Well, hey, read my book. And the beauty of my book, 35,000 little words, very small book. Read the book. It goes into much more depth than I could.
I think I'll have to do that.
Please do, and leave a glowing review.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, and I've thoroughly enjoyed your depth of research and explaining things the way that you did. And now I'm going to have to reframe how I speak about the Bill of Rights, I think.
I'm sorry. I really do believe that you must. And again, it's got absolutely nothing to do with me. Nothing. My book, it's 80% quotations. Okay. It's not me. It's the framers. Here we go. James Wilson again. In a government consisting of enumerated powers, such as is proposed for the United States, a Bill of Rights should not only be necessary, but in my humble judgment, highly imprudent. In all societies, there are many powers and rights which cannot be particularly enumerated. A Bill of Rights annexed to a constitution is an enumeration of the powers reserved. If we attempt an enumeration, everything that is not enumerated is presumed to be given. In other words, everything not written down is presumed to belong to the government. The consequence is that an imperfect enumeration would throw all implied powers onto the scale of government, and the rights of the people would be rendered incomplete. On the other hand, an implied enumeration of powers of government reserves all implied powers to the people, and by that means the Constitution becomes incomplete. But of the two, it is much safer to run the risk on the side of the Constitution, for an omission in the enumeration of the powers of government is neither so dangerous nor important as an omission in the enumeration of the rights of the people. James Wilson.
Wow.
And last thing before I let you go, or before you let me go, look at me acting like the host. Last thing before you let me go, the third thing, back to the whole money thing. Chapter 3 of my book discusses the paper money crisis, America's first welfare program, which I earlier referred to as alarming as the mark of the beast in Revelation. Nowhere else in the entire face of the globe will you find an explanation, again, backed up with dozens and dozens and dozens of quotations, that the only reason the U.S. Constitution was written, remember, we'd beaten the British in 1781, they're gone. Why is the Constitution of the United States suddenly need to be written in 1787? That's because the states are far too democracy, and they were instituting a welfare program, a blatant welfare program, generated by the printing of nearly worthless paper money in order for indebted people to pay off their debts. That is the reason we have a U.S. Constitution, not one of several. I'll give you one quick example. James Madison wrote an essay, Vices of the American Political System, explaining why, this is before the convention, why we are calling this convention, why is it necessary, what are the vices of the American political system that make a new U.S. Constitution necessary. He wrote of 12 different vices, 12. Paper money was only one of the 12, but it was the first on the list, and of the 3,100-word essay, Paper Money Welfare Program took up 1,200 words. The U.S. Constitution came into existence, was written because of and to crush a welfare program, period.
Wow. Okay.
Chapter 3.
Okay. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Rick, thanks for being on the show, and I think you've given my listeners something to think about.
I certainly hope so, and I thank you for having me. Anybody who gives me a voice or a platform, I am very, very, very grateful for, and I really deeply, sincerely thank you.
So thanks for tuning in to Liberty and Gun Rights. I want to thank my guest, Rick Lynch, for reminding us that the fight for freedom is ongoing, and it starts with each of us. Let's keep the spirit of liberty alive in our homes, our communities, and our nation. God bless you, and God bless America. And thank you for the privilege of your time. And we'll talk to y'all later.